These are the lecture notes for Chapter 8 on metabolism. Okay. Okay, there are some concepts. It's still not going to let me do that. Okay. There are some concepts from, I guess, physics and chemistry together that you need to know. You need to be familiar with the laws of thermodynamics and how that applies to biology. There's the first law and the second law. So the first law of thermodynamics says that energy can be transferred and transformed, but not created or destroyed. So make sure you know the first law, energy can be transferred and it can be transformed, but it can't be created or destroyed. And the second law of thermodynamics is the entropy law. And that says that every energy transfer or transformation increases the entropy or disorder of the universe. Okay, sorry. I'm just getting used to how I have to scroll through these. Okay, so basically with living things, you have light energy from the sun, which is transformed into chemical energy inside of plants during the process of photosynthesis. And then that chemical energy is transformed into another form of chemical energy, I guess. Basically, in plants, the chemical energy is converted. Okay, so this is confusing, but the light energy from the sun is converted into these chemicals called ATP and NADPH. That's what it means by chemical energy. Those molecules are converted into, are used to convert carbon dioxide into organic molecules or food for the plant in the form of sugar. Okay, so that food in the form of sugar or other carbohydrates is what is meant here by chemical energy. The chemical energy in organic molecules is, used to produce energy by the termites and all other living things. And then the beetle larvae eat the termites, so they use that food from the termites for whatever processes that requires energy, whatever biological processes require energy in their bodies. But what the energy that is not used by the beetle larva is released as heat. And the energy not used by the plant from the sun is released as heat. The energy not used by the termite when it digests the wood, the food in the wood, is released as heat. So every one of these energy transformations increases the disorder or the entropy of the universe. So that is the second law of thermodynamics. The first law is that energy can be transformed or transferred, but it can't be created. It's the energy is comes from sunlight ultimately, and it can't be created. It can't be destroyed. So any energy that's not used is released as heat, and that increases the disorder or the entropy of the universe. These are chemical concepts from chemistry. But basically just make sure that you are familiar with the first and second laws of thermodynamics. Then when we talk about metabolism, that is all of the chemical reactions that occur within our cells. All of the chemical reactions. That means the breakdown reactions, the buildup reactions, all of them. And a metabolic pathway is the steps that are taken to alter a specific molecule and convert it into a product. Each step in that metabolic pathway is catalyzed, or the rate of that reaction is increased by a specific enzyme. An enzyme is a protein, which is a type of macromolecule, one of our large molecules that we learned, that speeds up a specific reaction. So each step in the pathway is catalyzed by a specific enzyme. So you have a molecule that you start with, and in the first reaction, you have an enzyme that catalyzes that. The second reaction, enzyme catalyzes that. Third reaction, enzyme catalyzes that, and you end up with a product. So it's not like one chemical reaction where you have reactants converted to products. It's several chemical reactions before you get your final product. That's a metabolic pathway. So catabolic pathways are breakdown pathways. They release energy by breaking down complex molecules. The most important catabolic pathway is cellular respiration. Cellular respiration breaks down glucose in the presence of oxygen, and it's an example of a pathway because basically you start with glucose, and glucose goes through 4 processes: glycolysis, the preparatory reaction, the citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain, which we'll learn about in the next chapter. But cellular respiration is one of those metabolic pathways where you start with glucose and you end up with carbon dioxide and water. But it's a series of steps. So every single step in the pathway has an enzyme that catalyzes it. Anabolic pathways are the pathways which build larger molecules or more complex molecules. So photosynthesis is an example of an anabolic pathway, whereas cellular respiration is a catabolic pathway. Photosynthesis is an anabolic pathway. It also gives you synthesis of a protein from amino acids is an anabolic pathway. Just in case you need this definition, bioenergetics is the study of how energy flows through living organisms. And energy is defined as the capacity to cause change or to do work. Okay. Energy exists in various forms, and living cells have to transform energy from one form to another. So from light to chemical, and from chemical energy to mechanical energy sometimes when you talk about living things producing contractions or movement, and electrical energy as well. So you may know the difference between kinetic and potential energy. You may have learned this in a science class before, that kinetic energy is the energy of motion, whereas potential energy is stored energy. Thermal energy is kinetic energy associated with the random movement of atoms or molecules. And when thermal energy is transformed from one object to another, it's transformed in the form we call heat. So thermal energy and heat energy are basically the same. Light energy is a type of energy that can be harnessed to do work, such as in photosynthesis. And potential energy is stored energy. So molecules possess potential energy in their bonds, in the bonds that form between their atoms. Chemical bonds store potential energy. So chemical energy is potential energy, which is available for release. And it's stored in the bonds between the atoms that form molecules. So for example, glucose. You may remember the formula for glucose is C6H12O6. So it has 6 carbon atoms, 12 hydrogen atoms, and 6 oxygen atoms in it. A total of 24 atoms in glucose, in one molecule of glucose. So the bonds that form between those atoms hold stored energy or potential energy, and we call that chemical energy. So when that glucose is broken down, it will release that energy. This just talks about how energy can be converted from one form to another. And then thermodynamics, we'll talk about this a little bit more, is the study of energy transformations. Organisms are considered open systems because they absorb energy. For example, like a plant absorbs energy from sunlight and then releases heat and waste like carbon dioxide to the surroundings. So that's called an open system. So it's got to get its energy from outside, which is sunlight, and then it releases energy in the form of heat to its surroundings. So that's an open system. So according to the first law of thermodynamics, the energy of the universe is constant. You can't create it or destroy it, but it can be transferred and transformed. And that's the first law of thermodynamics. And the second law of thermodynamics is that any energy transformation increases the disorder or the entropy of the universe. Entropy is a measure of molecular disorder or randomness. So again, the first law of thermodynamics just says energy can't be created or destroyed. The second law says that during any energy transformation, any transfer of energy, that is always going to increase the entropy or the disorder of the universe. That's the second law of thermodynamics. Sometimes the processes that increase the entropy are spontaneous, and sometimes they're not. We know that organization and order is one of the characteristics of living things. We know living things are organized from atoms into molecules, molecules into large molecules, and the large molecules form the organelles or cell parts, which combine to form the cell, and then many cells form tissues, many tissues together will form an organ, and so on. Now, what I'm not going to ask you about are any questions on change in G. I can promise you, I will not. I want you to understand that the entropy of the universe increases anytime energy and energy transformation occurs, but we don't have to do any chemical calculations with that. So I'm just scrolling through to see. You do need to know that some chemical reactions are exergonic. That means that these are your breakdown reactions like cellular respiration. They release energy to the surroundings. And some reactions are endergonic. They require energy from the surroundings. So an exergonic reaction would be cellular respiration, and an endergonic reaction would be photosynthesis. And you can look here and see if it's an exergonic reaction. There's a lot of energy stored in the reactants. When they're broken down into the products, there's energy released. So that's exergonic. And endergonic, you have your reactants which absorb energy, and the final products have more energy stored in them because they're normally larger. So endergonic reactions require energy. And there is a video if you would like to watch it. This is slide number 41 on chemical reactions in ATP energy. Now, any questions about whether or not the reactions occur spontaneously, I definitely will not ask. Whether change in G is negative or positive, no, I will not ask about that. I just want you to understand that exergonic releases energy, endergonic requires energy. Exergonic, where you're breaking bonds, is going to end up releasing energy, and endergonic, forming bonds, is going to require energy. Okay. We're going to skip some of this stuff. A cell does three main kinds of work. It does chemical work, and the chemical work is pushing endergonic reactions, reactions which require energy, transport work, which is pumping substances across membranes, and mechanical work, like when cilia beat or muscle cells contract. So many times a cell will use the energy from an exergonic process to drive the endergonic process. That's called energy coupling. So usually your exergonic process will produce ATP, and then that ATP will drive the endergonic process. And there's an animation, this is slide 57, that you can watch on ATP. We will start with slide 58 in the next recording.